With me now here in the studios are Clarence Lusane, who is a professor of political science at Howard University, and Anushay Hossain, who is a political commentator. We just went over the results. Any surprises for you so far?
So far, no surprises. It looks like the wave will be perhaps more of a ripple as the tallies are starting to come in. Of course, Florida and Georgia are significant in terms of not only just the Senate races themselves, but the historic nature of having African Americans and African American women in the race for those seats, those governor seats. And so we'll see how that turns out. Maybe a long night on Georgia, because even if it's really close, then we get into provisional ballots. And then we may even have a runoff. So it's going to be a while before we know what happens in Georgia.
Why could we see a runoff in Georgia? That's because there is a third-party candidate, actually, and that could prevent one of the two, the Republican and the Democrat, actually reaching that all-important 50% threshold. And then we're going to see possibly a runoff in a month's time.
Yeah, exactly. But there's also complications in Georgia with, which we were just talking about, with voting machines. And so it's going to be extremely tight. But some positive news, as we were speaking about earlier, how important it is the record number of women and women of color that are running. It already seems like we have two of our Muslim American women set for the House. We have our first Palestinian American woman, Rashida Tlaib, and of course, Ilhan Omar, who is a hijabi, who's a covered Somalian American. So that is very victorious, considering, you know, we had about 100 Muslim candidates in these midterm races, and that's really important considering how Muslims were specifically targeted under Trump repeatedly.
We saw this midterm to be extremely energized on both sides, on the Republicans and Democrats. A record number of people went out and actually cast their vote early. How does this sort of play into a type of election that generally isn't really all that important?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with President Trump. We have a leadership in America right now that's incredibly divisive. And it's not only based on rhetoric, it's a lot about cultural issues. We're divided down the middle, I think, on race, on gender, on immigration. So these are really contested issues. And we have a leader who's constantly throwing flame and fire onto the conversation. So.
And the way the midterms were run, they were run with that division in mind. There was no effort on the part of the president or the Republican Party to reach out to the other side or to reach out to independents. And so a very hard line was laid down. Now, what I would say coming out of this election, regardless of whether or not the Democrats take the House or whether or not these governorships are won by these minority candidates, is that we have set in motion a political movement of women, of African Americans, of Muslims who have united and will be players as we move forward towards 2020, as well as what happens in the states.
Okay, with that in mind, all right, if the Democrats are able to sort of flip the House, how does this affect President Trump's style of governing for the remainder of his first term?
Well, I think there's finally going to be some kind of checks and balances on his policies. I mean, what we've seen with the Republicans, basically, they have the House, they have the Senate, and they have the White House. So really, Donald Trump has been, the Republican Party has become the party of Trump. So there's really nobody that is arguing with him or really challenging his authority on everything. We've seen the GOP really go along with whatever Trump wants because their focus is on the Supreme Court.
Something specific. Are we going to see sort of like an ending to the tax cuts, maybe an ending to the repealing of the Affordable Care Act, or also known as Obamacare? What are some specifics that we can look forward to if the Democrats are able to sort of flip the House?
We can look to a lot of gridlock because President Trump, essentially, it will be very difficult to get any bills out of Congress. So that will be the first hurdle. If anything gets to the president's desk, whether he will veto it or not will be another hurdle. So we can look to a period of, I think, more intense division rather than the elections, the midterms calming things down. Now, I also think that the Democrats will also be responding to whatever comes out of Mueller. So in the last month or so, because we've moved towards the midterms, there's been sort of an apparent hiatus. But the report is coming. And one way or the other, the reaction to that report will be another spoon into this soup that we're seeing stirring right now.
All right. Thank you to the both of you for that expert analysis.